everyone. My name is Emanuela Imo, and I am one of the hosts for today. This is the NGO Power Talk webinar series. And today we're looking at African NGOs and fundraising, a special edition from us, Ask the Experts. Before we get into the conversation, let's have some quick introductions. So please introduce yourself in the chat, drop your name, the country you're joining us from, the name of your organization, and your role at your organization. My name is Emanuela. I'm joining you from Nigeria. My organization is Hexa Media Africa, and I am the CEO here at Hexa Media Africa. So let's go. Let's see where you're joining us from. Your name, your country, make sure you engage with someone. Let's see where you're joining us from in the chat. I'm going into the chat now to see. Let's see if the chat is bubbling. Yes, I see the French people. Bonjour, bonjour. Thank you so much for joining us. South Africa, welcome. Lawrence from South Africa, welcome. Fair Action Nigeria, welcome. Kenya, welcome. Uganda, welcome. Benin Republic, welcome. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, thank you. Ghana, repping Ghana, welcome. Welcome. Zambia, how is Zambia today? Welcome. Yes, I see people from Kenya. I see people from Kenya. Welcome. Uganda, Nigeria, South Africa. Wonderful. Cape Town, wonderful. Namibia, welcome. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us all across Africa. Benin Republic, welcome. Rwanda, wonderful, welcome. Malawi. Hi, Natalia. Thank you for joining us. Hi, Abraham. Thank you for joining us from South Sudan. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, keep it coming. I see it. Keep it coming. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Wonderful. All right. So now that the introductions are going, you can keep it coming. Keep it coming. Make sure you connect with someone today. I love to let everyone know at our webinars, we want you to connect with someone. Don't just come to learn, also come to connect. So thank you so much for introducing yourselves. Now that we have met you, it is time for you to meet us. So what is the NGO Power Talk? The NGO Power Talk is hosted by Hexa Media Africa and African NGOs. It is a dynamic webinar series that we put together for you to equip nonprofit leaders like you across the African continent with strategies and resources to enhance your impact. And we've already had 3 events. This is the 4th one. And if you've joined us from February up till now, this is September and 4th webinar. Please drop something in the chat. Drop the number of webinars you have joined us. If you've joined the first one, just drop 1. If you've joined the 3 webinars, drop 3. If you joined only 2, drop 2. I want to see how many webinars you've been following through from February this year. And so the very first webinar we had was reimagining African NGOs from survival to sustainability. And that was in February 2025. And the second was AI for Impact. We had an amazing session learning about AI. That was in April. And the third one was just recently in July on crowdfunding and African NGOs, challenges and opportunities. And we had an amazing time also learning about crowdfunding and the African NGO sector. And today we are here again for the 4th webinar event in this NGO Power Talk series. And the program for the day is simple. We're just going to have a welcome and overview, a session, introduction, the expert Q&A session, and then we wrap up and close. And like you already know, we like to go straight up into the tea. We do not like to waste your time. We like to go straight into the conversation, and you can see from our program that that's what we have planned for you today. And so a quick overview of today's event. We're looking at fundraising, and we know that fundraising for African NGOs is changing fast, very, very fast. When we first started this webinar series, there was the cut from America with all of the funding, and in 2024, the global philanthropic giving reached over $850 billion. Yet African NGOs accessed only a fraction of this. And many of you rely on short-term, highly restricted grants. And if you're here listening to me, I'm sure you can actually relate to what I'm saying. At the same time, while cuts are going on, while restrictions and limitations are happening, more opportunities are opening up, and donors are moving towards localization and trust-based philanthropy. Mobile giving, corporate partnerships, and social enterprise models are expanding access. So this shift brings both pressure and possibility to the African NGO sector. This means you have to compete in more tighter funding pools, but you have to also position yourselves for emerging streams of income. And that's why this session is very important. And so today we have decided that instead of long presentations, you have a chance to ask real questions, get practical answers from experts who have helped African NGOs secure millions in funding. And as you know, we always bring the best of people to speak to you here. We had 1,200 plus registrations, which means we had 1,200 questions to respond to, right? And so we want to, as much as possible, give you a chance to get answers to your questions and get practical, relatable responses from the experts we have brought together. And so our objective for today's webinar is quite simple. Provide African NGOs with direct access to experienced fundraising consultants, demystify fundraising trends, donor shift, and practical digital tools, create a space for open consultation driven by participants' own questions, and also strengthen knowledge sharing and peer connections across African NGOs. And so if you're still here with me, I would like to see in the chat, how many NGO Power Talk series have you joined? If you joined one, you've joined two, please drop in the chat how many NGO Power Talk series have you joined so far. We've had 3. How many have you joined? Let me see in the chat. 1, 2, this is your first. Welcome. You're set for a good time with us today. Welcome. Yes, I see you. This is your first. Welcome. Okay. A lot of people, this is your first. Okay, first time. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. The replays to the other sessions are on our YouTube channel. You can check them out. A lot of people, this is your first time. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for coming. Oh, I see someone. This is your second time. Great. Wonderful. Okay. So without wasting so much time, I'm going to go back to my presentation. Yes, so who are the hosts of today's webinar? We are the webinar hosts, David Barnard and Emanuela Imo. We are the host of the NGO Power Talk. David Barnard is a development consultant and also the founder of African NGOs. Emanuela Imo, like I just introduced myself, I'm a communications consultant and the CEO of Hexa Media Africa. And a quick intro to African NGOs. At African NGOs is an online community and an X account dedicated to sharing news and resources related to African NGOs. And it is managed by David Barnard, a seasoned African philanthropy and NGO consultant with over 25 years of experience. It supports NGO leaders, donors, and stakeholders while promoting the positive impact of African NGOs. If you're not already connected to African NGOs or David Barnard, make sure you go to X or you go to LinkedIn, search up the name, you will find it. Make sure to give him a follow. Also, Hexa Media Africa is a full-service digital media agency, and we help African NGOs and impact-driven businesses leverage tech, media, and communications for growth and impact. You can check us on our website or on LinkedIn, all social media platforms at Hexa Media Africa. Make sure to give us a follow. Some quick housekeeping rules. Please shut out every distraction. We're about to get started. Use the chat function to communicate. Some of you might not be able to use the chat function. Do not fret. Just go to the question box and drop in your questions. We would pay attention first to the questions that have been asked. So please don't be in a hurry, right? The webinar is going to be recorded, so don't worry. A recording will be available after the session. You would get, once you're registered, you're in here, you will get an email to let you know that the recording is available. And lastly, connect with someone. Very important, connect with someone. And so I would hand over right now to David to go on with the next part of the session. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Manuela. And also on behalf of African NGOs, I also want to welcome everyone to this event. As Emanuela indicated, today we are doing something different. This is not a typical webinar with a panel discussion and time for participants' questions at the end. As she explained, there's no formal panel discussion today. We will only answer your questions. Given what, to almost just follow up on what Emmanuel already shared with you, fundraising is a challenge or a priority for every African NGO, be it that you're big or small, old or young. And the fundraising environment in Africa and globally has changed significantly since the start of the year and continues to change daily. Many African NGOs are looking for support, advice, recommendations regarding fundraising. And today we're going to respond to some of the most critical questions you as participants, as well as African NGOs at large, are grappling with. Over the past few weeks, we've received more than 800 questions from you as part of the registration process, and our panel of experts will respond to some of these during the event. Of course, responding to all the questions received is impossible. So we have grouped the like-minded questions to identify the critical and the most common issues and themes. So if your specific question is not covered, hopefully the broader issue will be addressed. We're also considering doing a follow-up event to cover the questions not addressed today, or to create an online resource where the experts will answer critical questions. More about that maybe later. Also, as Emanuela indicated, we encourage you to add any questions or follow-up questions in the chat, and where relevant, Emanuela will share these for the experts to respond to. So let's get started with a brief introduction to our 4 fundraising experts. We are very honored to welcome 4 people with significant expertise in guiding and supporting African NGOs with their fundraising requirements. The questions you have raised and shared with us are the issues they deal with daily. So firstly, from Kenya, we have Dr. Michael Kiragu, the founder and principal consultant of Bell Consultants. Secondly, from Nigeria, we have Allwell Akibe, the co-founder and chief executive officer of Travail Ensemble. Thirdly, we have Chantel Cooper, the chief executive officer of the Children's Hospital Trust here in South Africa. And last but not least, we've got Lucy Nju, the founder and executive director of Real Time Insights in Kenya. We will share links to their websites and online profiles after the event. So let's get straight into your questions. And we're going to start out with 2 contextual questions to kind of set the scene and also reflect the context and many of the issues, that underlying issues that you've raised as part of your questions. So our first question relates to something that we all know. There are many issues that continues to impact the changing funding landscape for African NGOs. But probably the single biggest issue that played a role this year is or was the funding cuts that the Trump administration introduced in January this year, and obviously the direct and indirect implications of that decision for every African NGO. So our first question is from Peter Ngugi from Mothers to Mothers in Kenya. Peter asked, What are the biggest changes in funding trends you've witnessed since the shift in US foreign aid policy? To start off, I'm going to ask Olwell and Chantel to share with us a few brief contextual comments and insights about the shifting landscape. So Olwell, let's start with you.
Thank you so much, David. Thanks, Emanuela, for this opportunity to share with teams across Africa on how to proceed within this funding landscape. Really delighted to be here. I would say the trends have been really phenomenal since January of 2025. In terms of a background, as at last year, a study came out and it was found out that 90% of African NGOs, they get their funding from primarily two sources. So governments and UN agencies. Now in January, that was when the new American administration paused funding and eventually went on to dismantle USAID, an agency that is the biggest donor to Africa, broadly speaking, and has been here for more than 60 years. Now, USAID gave $12 billion last year, USAID alone. So the fact that USAID has been eliminated means that we have lost that $12 billion within the ecosystem for nonprofits in Africa. There are two changes I've seen. The first is it's not just the US that is reducing funding. Over the last 3 years at least, other European governments have also reduced funding. So what we heard now is the UK reducing the amount of funding they give from 0.5%, 0.6% of their gross national income to 0.3%. It might look small, but generally, analysts have looked at that drop in UK funding to amount to almost 40 billion pounds in the next 2 years. There's also drop in funding from Germany as well. There's also drop in funding from Sweden and then other European governments. So that government angle that has primarily supported African NGOs has really dropped down. I think the second biggest trend I've seen is also a big loss of funding for UN agencies. Remember that UN agencies and governments are the ones that primarily fund African NGOs. Unfortunately, the UN system got most of its funding from the American government, and the current American administration has also cut that. What this means and what we are seeing in the landscape is that the UN systems are generally underfunded. There are more than 25% cuts in UNICEF, for instance. There are up to 30% cuts in OCHA, humanitarian organization body. And in fact, the UN's response is that they are going to have to merge a number of UN agencies together to cut costs. Now, this is scary because we're hearing agencies like WFP, UNESCO, UNICEF. Imagine all of them being merged into one body. That's a big problem. So in conclusion, I would say it's possible that the UN agency that even funded your African NGO as at last year, it might not exist anymore from this month when UN agencies decide to consolidate under what they are calling the UN80 initiative. So that's a big problem. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Olwell, for that kind of high-level overview. Chantel, any additional perspectives you want to share?
It does sound scary. Thank you, David and Emanuela. It does sound scary, and if you're working in a fundraising environment, it seems quite overwhelming when you listen to that. But I think if you change your perspective and see it from what are the opportunities that we have as an African continent, we have an opportunity to find ways to work differently. So when you look at the position that we're in now, we already started exploring blended financing, impact investing, private finance models. And I think one of the biggest lessons we've learned from COVID is the value of working together. So rather than relying on outside sources, we're actually forced to look internally and look inside ourselves within our own continent. Where are the avenues for opportunities and growth? And so that would be, as was mentioned in the beginning in the introduction, is there's mobile opportunities, there's technology, there is trust opportunities, but also there's a growing individual philanthropic movement that we can tap into. And so I think rather than being overwhelmed by how frightening it is at the moment that the money's leaving, there is money on the African continent. We just need to find out how to tap into it.
Thank you, Chantel. And I'm sure many of those issues or sentiments that you've just referenced will also come up the discussions or the responses to some of the other questions. Moving away from kind of the broad contextual issues, someone asked a question which I think is very relevant, maybe a cheeky question, but it's probably something that everyone in their own unique context is grappling with. And that is a very simple question. Why is fundraising difficult? Probably if it was easy, we would not be here today. So we have this question from Agunimi from Hope Raisers Global Foundation in Nigeria. So Lucy and Michael, if I can pose this question to you, by drawing on your experience and interactions with so many NGOs on a day-to-day basis, why is fundraising difficult, and why is it, say, top of that priority list for most NGOs on the continent? Maybe Lucy, let's start with you.
Hi, thank you, David. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Great. Sorry, I see my image is frozen. But I think it's a tricky question, like you have said. Why is fundraising difficult? I at times feel like I think we all agree that anything that is worthwhile, anything that is great in this world is at times difficult. It requires more persistence. It requires more work. So I don't think necessarily maybe the right one is difficult, but perhaps it's stressful. Perhaps it requires more effort, more energy. But having said that, I think it's fair to recognize, yes, it can be a very stressful process. Having worked with many organizations, I think it's stressful for not just for all kinds of organizations, both international organizations as well as small-based organizations. But I think also the difficulties, especially for the African NGOs, stems to some extent from the systemic challenges that we have seen. For many NGOs, African NGOs, I think many of our organizations have been formed, were really not designed with the fundraising systems in mind. So you'll find we lack very critical fundraising systems. There has been for many years of a dependence on the global north, and you'll find a lot of African NGOs are more of implementers than actually, they're very good at implementing, but when it comes to really fundraising, it becomes a challenge that we lack in many cases some of those systems. We lack the structures, and I also think this is also closely related to the capacity of the staff that we have. Fundraising as a profession in Africa, I feel, is still a very young profession, and you'll find that there's a lot of development yet to happen. We don't have the systems even for professional development. So I think when you put all these together, coupled, of course, with the current challenges that we are facing, then it becomes a little bit stressful for many of us. Thank you. Back to you.
Thanks, Lucy. Michael, any perspectives or insights to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, David, and thank you, everyone, for this opportunity to have this important conversation. Riding on what Lucy has said, just because it was not a priority in the recent past, fundraising has been seen as an appendage in many of our organizations. It's not. We haven't seen it as a core part of our work, our daily work as non-profit workers. So in that sense, we haven't quite developed the fundraising skills. There's underinvestment in fundraising in most organizations that I work with. Boards do not prioritize fundraising. There are myths around, what fundraising is all about. There's thinking that, why don't you just approach the next rich person and ask them for money? Yet there is much more to fundraising than what has been presented to us. And I just give this example, in the private sector, we have the marketing arm of an organization. No private sector organization or industry organization sees marketing as an appendage. It's a core to their survival, it's a core to their business. And that's how fundraising should be looked at. So when we feel fundraising is challenging, there are systems, there are investments that are required to make fundraising work efficiently and to deliver the results. there's also some mindset attached to it. And I think it's part of the tricky question that we are getting from, one of our colleagues asking this question. But there's the thinking that, most people who are running organizations are technical people. Most of them came from, technical, so they're very mission focused. They are focused on delivering the results. But fundraising is seen as that thing that has is on the side, but also it's not our core function. So many people find fundraising, it's more like begging, trying to convince funders. Yet you miss out on the bigger point around developing partnerships and engaging with those who are aligned to your mission. So that, in that sense, it's something that we need to shift in terms of our mindsets, but also develop our skill and knowledge around. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And I think it's very important, some of the issues that you've just raised about the strategic significance of fundraising. It's not just something that you can take for granted, or there's a one size fits all. As with anything else, unless there's training and effort and investment, then obviously you can't expect to achieve the results as required. So let's then move to, say, almost what I would call our first thematic issue. And we've received many, many questions that deal with, say, fundraising strategy. And in that context, and I think Chantel already referenced it in her comments, the whole issue of diversification, thinking about fundraising differently, or different components or aspects to, say, maybe more traditional fundraising, which probably many people would equate to, say, grant writing. So the first two questions, which for me stood out, was in the first one is from Robert Akua from Humanity for Development and Prosperity Organization in Uganda. And Robert asked, in the current funding landscape, what are the 4 most critical steps? Robert is very specific. Maybe there are not 4, maybe there are even many more, in order of priority, that a national or a local NGO must take to successfully mobilize and sustain the resources. Now, we probably can, allocate the whole webinar to that question as it stands. But maybe, Chantel, if I can pose this one to you, just again, based on very practical experience that you have in running your own organization, but also how you guide maybe others that ask you for advice, a few critical steps that maybe can be very helpful to people that are on this fundraising journey or are experiencing significant challenges with their fundraising approaches.
I can. I've been fundraising for over 30 years, and I have been involved in a very small organization where we operated from crisis to where I am today, where we've actually built a sustainable organization. So I think what we don't often realize is that everybody in your organization is part of the fundraising process. There's no one person who does fundraising. So even if your title is fundraising, you're not the only person responsible for fundraising. So when a donor looks at an organization in terms of whether they want to support you or not, the first thing they're going to look at, the number one priority, is how credible are you as an organization? And so is your money going to be safe when you give it to that organization? Is it going to go to where it's intended to be? So as an organization, you need to look at yourself quite critically and look at your internal structures, your systems, your governance, your compliance. And what is often left out of conversations is the importance of who is on your board. Your board is absolutely critical. So if you're a new organization, be very selective in who you select as your board members, because your board members are responsible for your strategic direction, for your governance, your coalition, and you can use them to actually demonstrate credibility of your organization. So the board can be very useful, and I'm going to mention that quite a few times today. The second really important thing is, and I think a lot of us are in that same position now, And one thing our organization has done well for 31 years is have a diversified fundraising base. Never rely on one or two donor streams. So we have a very strong diversified fundraising base with a strategy for each sector. And we'll touch on that a little bit later. The third part is the core to fundraising is relationships. People give to people. And so there has to be investment from the leadership of the organization, from the board of the organization, from the fundraisers or the communications people, that you invest time and effort into building relationships with individuals, whether it's your donors, whether it's your connectors, or whether it's your partners. Relationships are critical. The fourth element is, as an organization, you need to find a way, if not, but if you are, that's even better, aligned to your country's goals. Are you aligned to the development goals of your country and your international development goals? So if you are, there are still going to be grants coming into Africa, and the opportunity is for African NGOs to be the recipient of those grants, not your international NGOs anymore, that you find a way to ensure that you know how to use the international language to align to the sustainable development goals. So I think for now, those would be the top 4 priorities from my view.
Thank you, Chantel. And I think that then the next question really builds on the issues that you've just raised. So maybe if I can turn to Olwell and Lucy. The question asked by Grace Murika from Wiser in Kenya. What are some of the sustainability strategies you can recommend for NGOs based on the current shift in funding? And she probably means the funding landscape or the funding environment. So maybe Olwell, we start with you and then we hand over to Lucy thereafter.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Grace, for a very important question. I want to emphasize what Chantel said, perhaps after I came up with the high-level statistics of what is happening externally in terms of what's happening with governments and UN agencies. And Chantel said, this is an opportunity for us to look inward and for us to look at the resources internally across Africa that we can leverage. And that's really the basis of my answer to Grace's question at this point in time. What I've been trying to do in trainings and with one-on-one support with clients across the continent since January in particular is help them envision a fundraising base that does not rely solely on grant writing to governments or UN agencies. And I feel like if you were to look within to see what opportunities there are, you'll be able to leverage them. I think of 3 particular opportunities now that are very important. And the first is corporate partnerships. It's not something that a lot of organizations take advantage of. There is research that shows that only 3% of African NGOs are actually fundraising from businesses. 3%. That means the remaining 97%, they are not taking advantage of this opportunity to partner with businesses. So local businesses within your country, in Kenya, local businesses in Nairobi, in Mombasa, in different places across Kenya, businesses that are trying to give back to the society. If you were to look at the work that Wiser is doing and figure out what kinds of companies within Kenya there are working around broad themes that Wiser is looking towards, then you'll see intersections and you'll see opportunities for you to pitch Wiser as a forward-thinking, community-rooted organization that can enable those businesses make even more impact in local communities across Kenya. The second thing is social enterprise models. I think this is very helpful. What we can see from how badly the USAID cuts hit all of us across Africa is the fact that African NGOs need to have the opportunity to generate their own form of income. Very basic income, at least, that can help cover their operating costs and can help them keep their doors open. So you need to look inwards into Wiser and see what expertise does Wiser have that you can monetize. Would you be able to sell some consulting services? Can you create a couple of bespoke products from your expertise and sell them? Can you rent out your assets, maybe your halls, your what's it called now, your IT systems? Can you provide some kind of support to other nonprofits or to other actors across Kenya? Can you create a membership community where you charge them a couple a little fee for them to be part of it, and then you help to see what value you can bring. So they're social enterprise models. The final thing, if I hand over to Lucy, would be individual giving. So we already know that we give, and I think, David, the research you did with Epic Africa shows that individual giving is the largest source of funding for African NGOs, broadly speaking. But can we make it, can Wiser look at a way to make it a lot more systematic? Can you build stronger relationships with your beneficiaries, with your partners across Kenya, and find a way to cultivate an individual giving program, whether through crowdfunding, whether through email solicitations, a way in which you can invite the broader Kenyan public to come and support your work with small amounts. Yeah, so a couple shillings here, another shillings in this way, or one way or the other, they can kind of crowdfund the ability for you to continue working on the issues that you're working. Over to you, Lucy.
Thank you, Owell, and thank you, my colleagues. I think a lot already has been mentioned in terms of strategies, but just to build on that, maybe just to summarize, what we are saying is that at this particular point, for any African NGO, we cannot afford to rely on traditional grants like it has been. The move is now on sustainability approaches, and Owell has already given some of the strategies that we are currently really proposing. But just to stress on that, I think the idea here is, as an organization, as we come up with strategies, one core thing is to ensure that you are able to generate income as an organization. You need to run away from the whole idea of being donor dependent. And as you diversify, one thing that I'm really working with with organizations, with nonprofit organizations, is to change our mindset and to explore how we can generate income and not just depend on external income coming into organizations. We are not saying that we still need the donors, but we also need to generate income. And some of the examples that Owell has already given, like having social enterprises, we have seen it work. We have seen examples like I think Mercy Corps has a very good model. We have seen many examples of social enterprises that can help us generate internal income, and so that ensures sustainability of our organization. So that is one of the key takeaways, that all of us who are here, if we do not already have a way of maintaining our core expenditure, then we need to sit down and come up with a strategy and work on that and be really good at it, so that it can sustain core functions within your organization. The other idea I just want to mention is, we have seen a lot of also new models coming up. I'm sure we have heard of impact investments, we have heard of blended financing, we have heard of resource-based funding, all these new models that are coming up. I think it's an opportunity for us to educate ourselves more, and to, of course, we are not saying all of us become social enterprises, all of us go into impact investment, but then can we also take this moment to learn, because we as NGOs, we are not, like I said, in our design, we tend to really be dependent on donors, but we have to shift and see, can blended finance be a model that we can focus on, and can it work for our organization? And we have seen, again, some of these models being practical, not for everyone, but at least we need to choose one method that can work for us. So bottom line is that we need to diversify. Without repeating what Owell and the others have said, is that we need to really diversify and build resilient organizations. Back to you, David.
Thank you, Lucy. So continuing on the line around fundraising strategy, I would say probably close to 20% of all the questions that we received in one way or another relates to challenges, concerns from, call it, say, small or recently founded or newly founded organizations. People that raise questions about lack of attention, where do we start? We don't have a track record. People don't want to speak to us because we can't show 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 years of experience, etc., etc. So we have received many, many questions highlighting those sentiments. So along those lines, we picked 2 questions which hopefully captures the overall sentiment. So the first one is from Robert from Hope Worldwide, Mozambique. In an environment where the fundraising space feels saturated and highly competitive, what practical strategies can a small NGO adopt to differentiate itself, attract sustainable funding, and succeed despite limited visibility and resources? And I'm going to ask Michael to take that one, and then for Lucy to take a related question. How can an organization with no previous record of receiving and managing finance secure funding? And as I just was scrolling through the questions, later on we have a question under donor engagement. And maybe to deal with that question here, a question from Sewise Asa from Safer World Empowerment and Development Initiative in Nigeria. And this is a question for you, Chantel. How do you demonstrate credibility and accountability to funders when your organization is still very young? So kind of three related questions that deals with this issue around age and experience and the implications of that from a fundraising perspective for African NGOs. So Michael, let's start with you, and then we'll go to Lucy, and then we'll end with Chantel.
Thank you, David. There's a challenge, particularly among grassroots organizations, and many of those that I work with. I come across this idea that we need to keep our organizations really broad, and this has become the recipe of just being one with everything that's, an organization one amongst many. In that sense, many organizations are not able to stand out. And this is a big challenge when it comes to fundraising. If you do not stand out, you do not show your unique place in the world, it's going to be really challenging for you to raise the resources that you need. Because as has been mentioned here severally, fundraising is strongly about relationships. And relationships are pegged on your ability to show that you care about a certain cause, as much as the person who you want to support your cause. You have to demonstrate that you really care about that cause. And as has often been said in fundraising circles, a spotlight that shines everywhere lights up nowhere. Unless you can have some focus around certain issues or a particular issue that you get so well known for it, you are not going to be able to differentiate yourself from the rest of the crowd. And that's something that you have to do right from early on, is to decide what is going to be a unique contribution to your community, either through your approach or the people you're serving, or the methodologies you're using. You need to be to demonstrate that you are unique and you occupy a unique space in your community. Following that, you have to connect that now to the people who you approach. You have to know what they care about. You have to be cognizant of what your funders and your donors care about, so that you are only approaching those who care about the issue the same way that you do. That is going to help you to get the resources, but you're also going to be getting the visibility with the right people. You don't want blanket visibility. We are moving out of that space where it's just about broadcasting who you are, and sometimes we call it the spray and pray approach. You spray to everyone and you hope it sticks on the person who really cares about what you do. So we want to use data to inform us on who really cares about what it is that you do, and target them. The third thing, which as I hand over this, is to get really good about telling that story. The story about what is the issue you're addressing, who is this that we are helping them, and how does their life look better? That goes to the impact of your work. So tell it like a story. Tell it. Get really good at telling that story, right from who you're targeting, what issues they are facing, what is their daily life like, and what and paint the picture of how their life would be if you transform the individual, the community, the family, the household with your services and interventions. How are you going to be able to transform their lives? Once you get that and you are able to get those, now look for the unique opportunities to share that story in conferences, on, electronically on all these media platforms, social media, your website. Those become opportunities of telling that story. But it has to be crystal clear what it is you're doing. It has to be targeted to the people who are likely to support you. But we definitely have to get better at telling stories that can be backed up by data along the way. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. And you've already touched on some of the communications related questions, and we'll come back to, or the issues rather, and we'll come back to a few comms related questions towards the end. So Lucy, over to you about organizations with no previous record of receiving or managing finance and getting funding.
Thank you, David. I want to start by saying that even the very established NGOs, at one particular point, they had no track record. So if you are at that point where you have no track record today, I think you need to realize that it's a step-by-step process. It's the same process, for example, like when you're looking for a job and you have no experience. So what do? We try to build our experience in one way or another. If you're looking for a job, perhaps you may start as a volunteer, you may start, building your portfolio. So for me, it's the same approach. How can we build our portfolio even though we do not have, the past record? So in addition to what Michael has said, I would say that you need to learn to start small and local. I think I also see a big challenge, especially with grassroots organizations, where we are new, but we want to start, looking for grants that at times we cannot demonstrate even the capacity to. Of course, you cannot if you do not have the track record. So let's start small and local. What does that mean? That you start with, focusing first on building a portfolio, and you can build this by working with volunteers, a team of volunteers, because you may not have the resources to hire staff. It's by looking at your circles and your network, and they could contribute small amounts of money that can help you to do whatever you're able to do with what you have. So let's start small with what we have, and we have seen organizations that have started very small, but as long as Michael said, you have a very clear focus on your contribution, you will find something you can do with your community and you will have some impact. So start small. The other key thing is leverage on your partnerships. Once people see what you're doing, then they may want to be associated with you. So map out who are the people or who are the other organizations that you can leverage, who are in the same space with what you are doing. Work in partnerships. Partnership is a sure way, or almost has worked very well for many organizations. So you work together with them. You could start as a sub-grantee. It could be with a very small grant, but then you build your experience with that. Of course, you have to demonstrate your accountability in very simple ways. Even if you're getting very small amounts of money from individuals, make sure you keep your records, start building. So my answer to you, in short, is let's build our portfolio one step at a time. If we had more time, I would have given you a case study of an organization that actually started last year, and you can check them out. They are called Change for Ga Initiative. I happen to be one of their board members. We started last year, and we are going somewhere. We have not received any grants yet, but we are not even focusing on grants because we are focusing on building our portfolio. We are doing an event, we call it Dance to Educate, where we are really raising resources through and dancing platforms. So there are many innovative ways we can build our portfolio. Back to you, David.
Thanks, Lucy. And maybe while Chantel answers her question, maybe you just want to pop something about the organization that you've just mentioned in chat, if there's anyone interested in following up on that. So Chantel, the issue of demonstrating credibility and accountability when your organization is very young. Any reflections on that?
I think it builds on what Michael and Lucy were saying earlier. And I think to add to what Lucy was saying, you start small, but you can also put parallel processes in place. So on the one hand, you need to ensure that your finances and the governance, and you registered, you have a constitution, all of that is in place, because even if you're applying for a small grant, those are the questions that the donors are going to ask you. You need to ensure that you comply with the rules and regulations of your country. The second part to that is understand what Michael said earlier, is who you're going to ask for funding. You're starting small, people who know your cause and support your cause. And parallel to that, we have an advantage now in this day and age that you have the power of social media, is that you also, parallel to that, start building your brand. And you build that through powerful storytelling, and it's giving thought and strategic thought on the stories that you want to tell that sets you apart, but also demonstrates the change that you bring into people's lives. And I think what people are also looking at in terms of making you stand out is be very wary of what you communicate and how you communicate to the world. Is even on social media, make sure it looks professional, make sure the language is professional. Make sure that you're taking the right photographs, the right angle that demonstrates how your organization makes a difference, but how your organization stands out from everybody else. I think what people are looking for is an organization that's driving change on the ground within the communities, but also an organization that they want to partner with, but a partner they can trust. And I think if you keep that at the forefront of everything you do, the money will come in.
Thank you, Chantel. So in the background, Emanuela is monitoring the questions. So we're going to move on from fundraising strategy. It seems that many of the questions that you guys are raising kind of deals with the issues already covered. So I'm encouraging you, there's no right or wrong in terms of the questions, but maybe try and add something new rather than to reinforce or highlight questions that we've already covered or are covering at the moment. So the next broad theme that we're moving to is donor engagement, and almost in a similar way that the issue of small and new organizations stood out as we analyzed the questions. Obviously, in this changing funding environment, many of you are very concerned about either retaining existing relationships on one side or how best to build new relationships. And what does that entail and what is required? So a few related questions here. So the first question that we've received is from Wamba Wenki from Generation Alive in Zambia. Which approaches have proven most effective for creating lasting trust-based partnerships with donors whose values align with our mission? And Michael, maybe if I can ask you to take that question. And then maybe Lucy, I think a question was probably top of many organizations' minds. What do donors look for most when deciding to fund an organization? And I think Chantel have just referenced some of those issues that you can do to demonstrate something, but maybe through the lens of a donor or the funder or funders and donors that you interact with, Lucy. Maybe there's some advice, maybe there's some insights that you can share with us. And then maybe Chantel, as a last one, maybe very explicit and specific, what are some of the best practices for donor reporting and accountability? A question by Michael John from Amani Foundation. So again, questions that need deep reflection and insight, but maybe let's try and give it, say, a couple of quick and brief but meaningful responses. Starting with you, Michael, with Wamba's question.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Wamba, for that question. This is the question that is, we could take a day to discuss this, but I'll just highlight one or two things that we haven't discussed today, or probably we have, but probably in another way, is that people and donors are really are increasingly becoming more interested in being your partners and working with you on your work. So a good way to build those trust-based relationships is to continuously bridge that space between you and your donors and see them as partners. Draw them into the work. Let them see the the behind the scenes, what you are really working on. Many of these donors, including the funders, they can offer a lot more than we usually ask them. We usually limit ourselves to asking them, for the check, for just the resources. But many of them have, opportunities to support you with many other things, with your strategy, with their networks and connections, with their programming experience. Many of them have some experience in programming. Some of them are knowledgeable in technology. Bring them in and see how they can help you with the work. The more you involve them in the work, the more they begin to see the realities of what it is that you're doing on the ground. And that builds strong trust. They see that there's nothing, you have nothing to hide. You're inviting them to address the issues together with them. It could be site visits. It could be just feedback on your program design. We have a new project we are designing. Give me feedback. But the more you invite them to get involved with your work, it helps people to see the humanness and the authenticity of the work that you are involved in, and it builds strong trust. And of course, we cannot overstate the importance of authentic communication. That's really important in your reports, in your engagements with the funders. You need to always be authentic. Whenever you have shortcomings, on the map. It always builds trust whenever you are dealing with your donors and your funders. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Lucy, what do donors look for most when deciding to fund an organization?
Thank you, David. To answer this question, I came across a very recent report. I think it was released last week, which was very specific and it focused on donors. It's a report I will share as a resource. It's called, it's under fundable project. It's called Bridging the Gap Between Charities and Funders. I know it's not based in our context, but there's a lot that we can learn. And one of the questions they asked the funders was really, what do you look at? So specifically that question. And they ranked the responses, and I just want to share some of the top. Of course, is what we expect, but of course, like Chantel has already mentioned, the first one that is ranked most highly was accountability. So donors are looking for people or for organizations that can have accountability systems. They want to be sure that their funds are going to be used for the purpose it was intended for. And that is why relationship building becomes very key, because a funder wants to have a lot of details about this organization to be able to make this decision. But bottom line is about accountability. They then look at also the organization budget a lot, and the organization budget, they want to see how do you, use your money? What is the ratio between your overheads and the program? I know there can be a lot of discussion around that, but they look at your budget, they see how you spend money. They look at our reports, and that's why it's important to have reports. I know it's not a requirement in many African or rather, we do not really prioritize a lot of annual reports. But it's important. They actually want to look at our reports and see what we are doing, what are our passion areas, what are our achievements, So reports are important. So we need to have that data and those reports being done. They look at our organization strategy. They look at to see what are our future plans. What are the focus areas? What are our priorities? Because I want to see whether your priorities really align with their priorities. So that is very important for us to take note. And something else that comes up, it's consistency. And consistency in terms of the information that you are sharing, what you are sharing in your social media accounts, what you are sharing in your website, in your reports, is it consistent? Are we talking of the same thing? Are the reports consistent? So it's important that we ensure that there's consistency. And I think bottom line, they also want to see that you have the capacity to implement what they're interested in, your priorities. Do you have the right governance structures, the systems in place? Can you demonstrate impact? Can you demonstrate the capacity to do that? So the list is long, but I hope you pick a few of that, and I'll be happy to share that resource with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. So Chantel, you've already touched on the issue of accountability in the context of new young organizations. So the question from Michael, some of the best practices in donor reporting, which ultimately speaks to the issue of accountability and by implication transparency. Any additional comments or sentiments you want to share there?
So I think donor reporting and accountability is absolutely key for retention. So if you want the donor to donate again, reporting is absolutely critical. And so just following on what Lucy said, is the format of your reporting is determined by who you're reporting to. So you have a lot more flexibility to be creative for an individual donor. And we often use video content to describe change within a project. And so it's driven by emotional impact, because the donor wants to know that they have contributed towards change. And in our case, it's with children. If you are reporting to a corporate donor, it's a little bit more formal, but you can also use data with videos, with graphic representations of what the project was about, the impact, the indicators, the outcome, all really, really important to ensure that it's all aligned to the proposal that you sent to the donors. And then those of you who have experience with grant-based reporting, you know that there's quite strict guidelines in terms of reporting. Your reporting determines your accountability. It is telling the donor that I have used your funding responsibly, and this is how you have helped us to generate change in our organization. It's also an opportunity that when you share a report for a donor, that they would say, oh, okay, it could be a reminder to a lapsed donor. Okay, I remember this organization, and this is a really good report. Let me continue giving to them. So within your strategy, reporting is really important from a retention or a nudge as a reminder to a donor to give again.
Thanks, Chantel. So we move to our next thematic issue, and I'm looking at the clock, and it's amazing how quickly time flies. So Allwell, we haven't heard from you for a while. So we have a whole section just dedicated to Allwell. So in the context of local fundraising, obviously the issue of localization is very much underlining to that. But more broadly, we have received many questions about moving away from thinking about funding from abroad, but what can be done in a local context? So there's two questions that deal with it specifically as a local giving, local fundraising issue. But more specifically, I think Allwell, where we want to tap into your expertise, and you've already referenced the issue of corporate relations in your opening comments. So maybe almost as a combined set of issues, those two questions about local fundraising, and then maybe digging deeper into, say, the corporate issue. If I can almost allow you, without reading those four questions, just from a time perspective, Allwell, if you can maybe give us some insights that you feel would be valuable and useful for participants.
Thank you so much, David, for the opportunity. I mean, thank you for your inputs, Chantel, Lucy, Michael. Really great points about donor engagement. In terms of local fundraising, I'm thinking of local high net worth individuals. I feel like we are not tapping into that resource enough across Africa. So for instance, if you're in Nigeria, where I'm based, we have more than 10,000 dollar millionaires in Nigeria. I think more than 10. I know there are a lot more in South Africa, but in Nigeria, at least, there are more than 10,000 dollar millionaires. And we already know that there is that trait of giving that permeates all of our African cultures already. People are giving in churches, people are giving to their family members, people are giving to their communities. I think local nonprofits, in terms of local fundraising, we have to get a lot more strategic into sourcing out the people that perhaps are not dollar millionaires necessarily, but people that have a high net worth within our localities, within our communities, within regions, or however your states are classified, and then just really find an audience with them to get them to understand what you are doing and get them to understand what the scale of the problem and the impact you have made so far, and how they would be able, their support to your work will be able to help you scale that impact. So what I see with local high net worth individuals across Africa is very one-off kind of projects, maybe projects sometimes just to be carried by local media or to be published in one or two places. Their philanthropy is not oftentimes, right, those are them that act locally without like any foundation or anything, they act individually. There's not a lot of clearly thought out process behind their philanthropy. It's something that is one-off. And I feel like this is an opportunity for you to really sit down and look within, do like a lot of mapping within your community, within your country, within your region, to look at which kinds of individuals have that high net worth. What previous philanthropic initiatives have they carried out in your community? Have they given to schools? Have they given to churches? What was the nature of their giving? Then find access, try to get access to get close to those people, maybe to their personal assistants, to their to people that go to the same church with them. Just one way or the other, try to get like some form of basic introduction and make an elevator pitch of the work that you do, and invite them to see how whatever support they give you will contribute to you making a lot more in that community. That's about local fundraising that I think we're not really taking advantage of. I'm always excited about corporate partnerships. I have a background in sales and marketing. Before I came into the nonprofit space, I also have an MBA degree. I really feel like I feel like African NGOs are leaving a lot of money on the table by not taking advantage of corporate partnerships. And I'll talk about why. I'll first start by why and then how you can take advantage. Why businesses really want to support organizations in the places where they work. And there are two major reasons. There's what I call the push factor, and then there's what I call the pull factor. So the push factor compels businesses to want to support your African NGO to make more impact. That is, and the pull factor would be what I call the corporate social responsibility, CSR, and environmental, social, and governance, ESG. Now, those two things mean that businesses must demonstrate to people that they are to various kinds of actors that they are accountable to. They must demonstrate how they are giving back to the society instead of just making profit from the society. So they must demonstrate their impact, their social impact to the government. Every year they have to make annual filings indicating how they are giving back. They must also demonstrate it to their board of directors. In quarterly board meetings, they have to demonstrate what kind of CSR initiatives they're carrying out every single year. They also have to demonstrate it to their shareholders. So if they're listed on, let's say, the Nairobi Stock Exchange or the Nigerian Stock Exchange, then their shareholders, you and I, people that have stocks in those, that buy shares in those companies, they are requesting information on how businesses are contributing to making good in the world or in that local community. They also have to demonstrate their social impact to communities. So what you see from businesses is they just do anything they can do to get by, to be able to post it out in newspapers and on social media. So they make donations here and there. They don't really think about the impact of their social impact initiatives. And that's an opportunity for you to come in, because you are the one that has worked in the community for 20, 30 years. You know the issues at hand. You know how those issues need to be worked on. And you know what it takes to really drive change at that local level. So that's an opportunity for you to tap into it. The second thing is, it is profitable for businesses to do social impact. So the first thing is, up to 75% of Gen Z and millennial employees, they only want to work with companies that are making a difference in their communities or in the world. So and usually those employees that have social impact ambitions, they are the best employees that a business has. So the business wants to keep them. So when you partner with a business in your local community, you give the business an outlet for their employees to make social impact by coming to volunteer for you, by making internal, what we call matching gift contributions, internal donations to your NGO, or by supporting you with mentorship, capacity building, various ways in which they can help you. Then the final thing is, it's good for a business it improves the brand reputation of the business. When they eventually support you, it improves the likelihood that they will secure more business from the markets. So what I want your African NGO to do is look around for businesses that are already been profiled in your local community, in, let's say, in South Africa, in Cape Town, in Nigeria, wherever they are. Look at businesses that are already doing some form of social impact. Maybe they're donating supplies to schools. Maybe they are making building donations, etc. in one way or the other. Then look broadly in the sector. Look at the sector in which you are working in. So let's say you're working on digital inclusion, for instance, for children in slums in Lagos. Look for companies that are like fintech companies that are working around telecommunications, digital inclusion kind of spaces. So look at those companies where your mission intersects with their business, and then find a way to you can do research, you can go up on their websites if they're a big company. In their annual reports, they will mention their social impact activities. So check those annual reports and figure out what they're already doing, then make a pitch to them about how the work you are doing can help them meet their goals for corporate social responsibility and their goals for growing their business. It just takes, so I feel like African NGOs run away from this because it's a bit harder than simply just writing a grant and expecting USAID to fund you or UN or the WHO to fund you. This one requires a bit more thought. It requires you to be a lot more entrepreneurial in going after these kinds of opportunities. You might not see them in terms of grants writing opportunities from a business, but you need to be proactive and go after them because there's a lot of money that you can take advantage of. And finally, before maybe I turn it over to you, David, what I like about businesses is they are the only ones that will fund your operating costs. Foundations will not fund it generally, except they are really, really good ones like Ford Foundation. But most foundations, just like other kinds of donors, they will only give you money for short-term projects. So only businesses understand that you need money to hire staff, you need money to do a strategic plan, you need money to grow your business, to invest in your IT, in your skills. Only businesses understand that, and they will give you money to do that. They will also give you more than money. They will give you in-kind donations. They will support you with software. They will give you products. They will provide their staff with opportunities to volunteer for you for free, to transfer knowledge. They also give you capacity building support. So there's a lot of stuff to benefit from businesses if you dare to try it out. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Orwell, and all those perspectives, reinforcing perspectives that you've shared. So we're now going to maybe a last thematic area before we start wrapping up. There are many other thematic areas that or groupings that we can cover. But I think probably the elephant in the room issue remains the issue around proposal writing and grant applications. You know, now that you have all the insights, the context, the background, the perspectives, it still something needs to happen for you to make the ask. And we received two questions, which I think is kind of different sides to the same coin. On the one side, it is about mistakes, and on the other side, how do we stand out? So, Lucy, I'm going to ask you to take care of question one. What common mistakes do applicants make that reduce their chance of getting funded, and how can we avoid them? And that is from Divine Cesare from AMR Initiative in Rwanda. And then the flip side to that, and maybe this is again a question for Lucy and for Michael. How do we make our grant proposal or letter of intent stand out and compelling to donors? So Lucy, let's start with you, and then Michael, I'll come to you for the second question.
Thank you, David. Now, the issue around proposal writing and the common mistakes that we make, there are so many mistakes we could discuss, but I'm going to classify them into four main categories. And let me start by saying that first, most proposals that we write, they do not fail at the writing stage, but many of them, they actually fail even before we start typing. Why? Because proposals is just part of the process. It's not the main thing. And I hope by now we do understand from the conversations that we have had that proposals are really one of the, it's a small component of the whole fundraising spectrum. So as we write proposals, let's remember that it's not the end by itself, the mean to end by itself. But the common challenges or the common mistakes I see a lot is one in broad category that we are writing proposals, we are responding to applications that are not a good fit for our organizations. Now I see too many organizations that apply for, for calls for proposals, they respond, but then they are really not a good fit. And let me say this challenge, it's cut across more big organizations because I've worked across the spectrum. And many organizations, especially the established organizations, they have a very clear go, no go process, and which we really appreciate, that you need to have a criteria that helps you decide, do I go on, do I not go on? But even with these processes being in place, the decision-making process, I have found it to be very interesting, that I think because of the challenges and because we really want the funding, we kind of overlook a lot of things. And so as an advice from my experience is that when you're doing the go, no go process, perhaps it is important to also engage an external person who may have another different lens, because you find organizations, they really do not meet the criteria. And if they meet the criteria, there is no adequate time to respond. Very recent, I had a case of a very well-established organization. They want to respond to put in an application for a call for proposal. They see it 1 month after it has been released. It's a huge call, it's a huge application, it requires partnerships, but they still think they actually can pull through the whole process. So it took a bit of effort to let them see that this is not practical, because if you've not even seen the grant, you're seeing it when it's already has been out, then chances are you will not do a good job in terms of responding. So without talking much, we need to ensure we are a good fit, we meet the criteria that is outlined, we have the time, we have the energy, we have the resources. Grant writing is a heavy investment. So, but we tend to just react many times. We are just reacting. We see a call, we react. It requires time. Lack of preparation is my other big category. Like I said, many times we are rushing. We have not prepared. So one of the things that we are helping organizations right now, because we find many organizations have a very lean team of staff. So one way you can do it is to prepare early, have documents ready, prepare your capacity statements. We're even going ahead now to prepare, content per thematic area. So once you know your thematic areas, you can prepare some content, you can do some theories of change, because if you know your mission, you know your purpose, what you want to achieve, there's a lot already you can be doing in preparation for calls for proposal. We need you to anticipate calls and start preparing early so that we do not rush the last minute when the calls are out. The other big reason why we are not successful is now when it comes to writing the proposal, our proposals many times are not compelling. If you read a proposal, you do not know what is the problem, what are you asking for? What exactly is this proposal about? We use a lot of jargon, we use a lot of statements that are not clear. AI at times helps, but I think it also makes things worse at times because we have very vague statements in our proposals. So in a nutshell, we need to build very compelling proposals. And what I mean by compelling, it's not just the technical knowledge, but also use of the language. How convincing are you? I have a framework I use. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll not go so much into the details. But also just to mention, the other thing is that when you are responding to a call for proposal, beyond having the technical know-how, the track record and all that, ask yourself, very critically, what are the chances that you're going to win? Do you have a relationship with this donor? Because if you do not have any connection, you perhaps want to think, how can I get closer to this donor? Because they want organizations that are, I think it's clear they have a relationship to some extent with. That you can overcome by partnering with other organizations that are already in that space. So those are some of the very broad. Of course, in terms of writing, we can mention a lot of other very specific mistakes that we make, but we need to avoid that this kind of mistakes by making sure that we fit the eligibility criteria, we prepare very well, we write, we take time to write. And maybe just before I hand over to Michael, I can quickly say that for all our proposals to make sure, we need to make sure that they meet some level, some criteria. One of them being that you can be able to demonstrate organizational capacity, and the many things that we've talked. Maybe how I can sum it up is having the capacity, having the technical skills, understanding all these things, it's not enough. You need to demonstrate it within the proposal. Don't assume the donors know you. They do not know you. You have to demonstrate it. So I find organizations telling me, but we have this capacity. But when you read the proposal, it does not demonstrate the capacity. It does not demonstrate your unique value proposition. It does not explicitly show how you fit in with the donor priorities. You have to be very explicit. And with that, let me hand over to Michael. I'm sure he has much more to talk about. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. Michael?
Yeah, thank you. Let me just connect what Lucy's submission together with the next question, which was about how to make the grants and letters of intent stand out. And Lucy brought out some of the things that we commonly see, the challenges around clarity. And one of the big challenges that I have noticed with many organizations is that many grant writers have not connected the issue that they are trying to address with the activities they are proposing and the results that are expected. And that is due to a very fundamental challenge. Right from developing your theory of change, if you want your proposal to stand out, your theory of change has to be clear to you first and foremost, you as a writer, so that you're able to connect all those pieces. You're able to connect the problem with the activities or interventions to the outcomes and the impacts that you are proposing. That, if it's not clear to you, that is going to be a problem. You're not going to stand out. You're going to be one in the sea. And right now, funders are bombarded by hundreds of applications, if not thousands, on any given day. They don't have the capacity to read and reread your applications. They want to see that it's clear right from the get-go. The next thing is that now in the era of AI, I'm seeing more and more applications that are, they are just churned out by your ChatGPT. It is a very general and lacks contextual depth. That in itself makes you not stand out because you're not going to propose anything that they've never heard of before. So your ability to bring in contextual depth, show that you understand your communities, show that this is a human being who's writing this proposal, who feels, who works directly with the communities, who understands the daily challenges of your communities. Use AI as a tool, not as a writer. Don't seek to make your AI tool the grant writer. You are the grant writer. Use it as a tool. So give it the information, the contextual depth that is required. And one way to bring in contextual depth goes back to what I mentioned earlier, which is around storytelling. You have to get really good about stories. You can infuse stories in many different ways to illustrate the challenges your communities or your beneficiaries go through, or to even illustrate what it is that your interventions will do for your clients. That makes you stand out. It makes you be human. Now we are bringing back humanness into grant writing. Interesting. We were previously bringing, digital tools and bringing grant writing into the digital age. Now it seems grant writing has been given to the machines, but we need to bring back the humanness in our grant applications and make sure that we demonstrate that these are humans who are serving humans, knowing what other humans are going through, and with the care and concern that we need to demonstrate in a proposal. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. So looking at the clock, I'm very conscious of the time. So we unfortunately we're going to skip two big thematic areas, and maybe this is basis for follow-up webinars. One around capacity, skills, and internal fundraising systems, where we've received many questions regarding things like what skills should we invest in. And then obviously, and I'm so happy that Michael referenced the issue of storytelling. I think Chantel also referenced communication-related issues. We received many questions regarding communication, social media, affordable ways of communicating, how best to communicate with our funders and stakeholders, whatever. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to deal with those, say, two broad themes. So almost as a way of wrapping up and looking ahead, we've got these two questions, which I think will hopefully act as some food for thought for everyone that has made the time and made the investment in joining us this afternoon. So the first one is, what does the future of fundraising look like against obviously the context of all the changes and the challenges, as well as the opportunities that people raised this afternoon? And that's a question from Katharina Mueller, Babies and Mothers Alive in Uganda. And then something that I'm going to ask each of the experts to respond to. What one piece of advice would you give to an NGO just starting its fundraising journey? So maybe let's start with the second question first. Very briefly, we just go around and just maybe there's one thing that stands out. Maybe the issue of skills is somewhere in there. And then maybe a quick second round, just what does the future of fundraising look like from your perspective? So starting with the piece of advice, maybe Chantel, let's start with you and then we'll go from there.
I think as an organization starting out, know the change that you want to bring. Don't try and solve 10 problems at once. Start with one. Know what you want to do. And what we've suggested through the whole afternoon this afternoon was start small, start with structure, learn how to tell powerful stories, and never forget to speak on behalf of your beneficiaries. Let the beneficiaries tell the stories themselves, because that's your most powerful communication tool.
Thanks, Chantel. Orwell, your piece of advice?
Starting out is exciting. That means you don't have to do things the way other people have done it for the last 50 years. So from the very beginning, plan to diversify your funding. From the very beginning, plan to raise money from businesses, from your own internal and generating income opportunities. Also start to gain enough support within your local community, within your beneficiaries, that they will be able to contribute their little amounts of money through individual giving, through crowdfunding for your work. So yeah, starting out, so that's an exciting time to not do things the way other people have done it, that has got them into serious problems since January. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Orwell. Lucy, piece of advice from you?
My piece of advice is focus. If you're new, focus on building your portfolio. Focus on leveraging the local resources that you have. There's a lot you can leverage and build a very strong portfolio and build your foundations. Two things always: demonstrate impact, build relationships. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Michael?
It's important for new nonprofits to recognize that fundraising is not an appendage to your work. It's a core leadership role. And the more you bring it and prioritize fundraising, the better your chances are of succeeding at it. And knowing that it's something, for as long as you run a nonprofit, fundraising is going to be a core function that you're going to have to invest in and build skills in yourself and in your team around fundraising.
Thank you, Michael. And so as a last round, let's look in the crystal ball. 2025 had its issues. What does the future look like? Orwell, let's start with you.
The future is promising, irrespective of how it has looked like since January. It's a future where fundraise from people that understand your community, that know the impact you want to make and are willing to contribute. So it's a crowd-funded future where local businesses can contribute to directly addressing the issues, where you can create products and sell them and earn the support of stakeholders, financial support from stakeholders, and one where you are able to mobilize support from the public that you are serving. So instead of sitting down and writing a grant application to funders in Europe or in the US that don't understand your context, they have already given you some predetermined thematic areas and predetermined activities for you to work on. You can sit down, mobilize local stakeholders within your own community, within your country, and generate resources for you to work on the actual needs that your people deserve, and make the impact that you know will move your community forward. So it's less dependence on external sources from outside Africa, and a lot more mobilization of African resourcing. Over to you, David.
Thank you all well. Chantel?
I think it's very exciting. I think what's happened this year has given us opportunities to do things differently. And to build on what Orwell was saying is that we're going to build African fundraising in an African way, and we are going to do that together.
Thank you, Chantel. Lucy?
Sorry. I see a transformation of the sector, of the NGO sector in the future. I see a lot of investment going to the NGO sector, not from the traditional donors that we're used to, but businesses, private sector. I see a lot of that transformation happening, focusing not just on social impact like we have always done, but also really focusing on economic impact, focusing on environmental impact, on building non-profit sector or organizations that are also able to be very sustainable, generating income. So I see very different kind of NGOs in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Michael, last but not least, it's all yours.
Always challenging to go after all those brilliant minds, but the future of fundraising is going to be relational. Unlike the past where we've had institutional funders shaping the way the sector operates and how we receive funding, we are moving to a place where we are going to have non-traditional people supporting, being the bulk of support to nonprofits. So individuals, the philanthropists, the corporates, all of that fundraising that we are trying to strengthen hinges on relationships. So the future of fundraising is anchored on relationships. So the better we get at building relationships with our supporters, the better we'll be at fundraising. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Michael. And with that, I think if we could do a round of applause, if this was a live audience, we would have done it. But I think to Allwell, to Lucy, to Chantel, to Michael, thank you very much for spending the afternoon with us, sharing those insights with us, drawing on your rich experience. Hopefully we can do it again. Hopefully we can find ways and means of doing it for longer periods of time. But once again, thank you for what you shared with us, and hopefully everyone takes something out of this conversation, and hopefully for those that were not with us today, they will get the benefit of the recording. A last thought from my side, just before I hand back to Emanuela to wrap up. I think if you have any suggestions for how we can build on today's conversations and or have ideas for other topics that we could cover, please share them with us in the evaluation form or just drop us an email. We appreciate your feedback and support. So from my side, thank you to everyone, experts and participants. And with that, over to you, Emanuela.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you to all of our experts for sharing your thoughts with us today. I really had an amazing time, and I've been taking notes, a lot of blog posts to put out for all everyone in the community. If this is your first time joining us, I see there are a lot of people here. Do not worry, you're going to get a replay to this session. As usual, we'll prepare for you a few days after the event. You would also get a summary of everything that has been shared as a blog and also as a carousel on all of our social media platforms. Please, one last thing, all our experts have either consultation sessions or different ways in which you can work with them, right? And they're all available on LinkedIn. You can check them out. You can see their names all on their profiles right now. Please go check them out and see how you can work with them if you're interested in working with them. In the blog post and also the subsequent emails that would come, we would also drop a link to how you can connect with them and any other contact details that they release to us so that you're able to work with them and get funding for your organization or any other resource that you may need. African NGOs and also Hexa Media Africa, we share some opportunities specifically for African NGOs. So please do well to also follow so that you can get in touch and get some of these updates for your organization as the time goes on. Thank you so much, everyone. We have come to the end of the 4th session of the NGO Power Talk series, and I look forward to seeing you all in another session. There is a feedback form, like David mentioned. Please make sure you drop your thoughts. Let's hear from you on how we can make this better and also bring on more experts for the NGO Power Talk series. Thank you, everyone, and see you another time. Bye-bye.